obviously the news yesterday, almost to the exclusion of everything else. Charlie Kirk assassinated at university event in Utah. Now, I just took this from the live updates, so this is the most recent as of this morning. Authorities say conservative activist Charlie Kirk was killed by a single shot in an apparent targeted attack during an outdoor event Wednesday at Utah Valley University. Kirk co-founded the conservative youth organization Turning Point USA and was a close ally of President Trump. This is a dark day for our state. It is a tragic day for our nation, said Utah Governor Spencer Cox. I want to be very clear. This is a political assassination. Authorities are seeking a new person of interest in the shooting and have no one in custody as of late Wednesday, according to a law enforcement official familiar with the matter, who was not authorized to discuss the situation by name and spoke on condition of anonymity. The shooting comes amid a spike in attacks on political figures in the United States across all parts of the ideological spectrum. The victim, 31-year-old Kirk, personified the pugnacious populist conservatism that has taken over the Republican Party in the age of Trump. He launched his organization, Turning Point USA, in 2012, targeting younger people and venturing onto liberal-leaning college campuses where many GOP activists were nervous to engage. The shooter, we're going to have more on the dynamics of this in the next segment, but we should, give you some backstory here. The shooter wore dark clothing and fired from a roof on campus some distance away, Utah authorities say. FBI Director Kash Patel, who earlier in the day posted on social media that a subject had been taken into custody, later wrote the person had been released after being questioned. So as of this stream, the shooter is still free and at large. Kirk was speaking at a debate hosted by TPUSA. The event at UVU had been met with divided opinions on campus. An online petition calling for university administrators to bar Kirk from appearing received nearly 1,000 signatures. The university issued a statement last week citing First Amendment rights and affirming its commitment to free speech, intellectual inquiry, and constructive dialogue. Okay, so we're going to go through what I think about this and some of the reactions to this. First of all, I do condemn this act wholeheartedly, unreservedly, without hesitation or equivocation. The most profound way in which becoming a parent affects you is that whenever you start spiraling and catastrophizing about what if the worst happens to me and I'm disappeared or kidnapped or jailed or even killed, God forbid, is that your mind immediately goes not to how such a tragedy will affect you, meaning me in this example, but how it'll affect your kids. How will they carry on? How will they deal with this? Will they be okay? And those thoughts are the scariest thoughts in the world. Certainly the scariest thoughts that I've ever faced. Parenthood is both liberating and terrifying in that sense. It's liberating in the sense that you're no longer the center of your own life, which is freeing in a way, because you would, without a second's hesitation, give your own life to save your kids, right? So there is something freeing about that. But the flip side of that, of course, is that your main responsibility in life now is to care for another person whose fate, no matter how much you try to protect them, is ultimately beyond your control. That's a very scary feeling. Parents often describe it as watching their kids walk around as like watching your heart beat outside of your own chest, right? It's freeing and terrifying at the same time. And so when I saw the video of the bullet hit Charlie's neck, my first thought was of his two young children, particularly the older one. Here she is on the set of Fox News with him. They obviously shot these videos at angles to show us not to reveal her face, but here she is.
Right.
And so I mean this very sincerely when I say that it is torture, actual torture, to put myself in her shoes and think of, what she must be going through now. And I know a lot of Charlie's peers in the space, like Glenn Beck, Megyn Kelly, Jack Posobiec, Benny Johnson, are parents themselves, and I know they're feeling that same pain for his kids, as I am. Many of them have probably met his kids. I'm sure it cuts a lot deeper and hits a lot harder. And she's going to be going through this for quite some time, likely the rest of her life in some way, shape, or form. I don't think this is a scar that ever fully heals. And as a parent, that is just absolute torture to think about. Now, here's the thing. I felt that exact same sense of torture just about every day for these past 2 years, watching image after image, video after video of not just boys and girls, sons and daughters being butchered in Gaza, but also mothers and fathers as well, and imagining what it's doing to their kids. There was one video I saw fairly recently of 2 young boys in a hollowed out building crying with each other as the sound of explosions boomed behind them. And they had no adults in their lives to comfort them. They were just left to comfort each other. That's torture. It's torture to see that. It's torture to think about that. It's been torture to see these things for the past couple of years. It's also torture as a parent to think of the terror in the hearts of these little kids whose parents have been disappeared in ICE raids, some of whom shipped off to a torture dungeon, speaking of torture, in El Salvador, where they're told by the guards upon their arrival that they'll spend the rest of their lives there and they'll never come out. It's torture to think of the pain of black children whose fathers have been killed by the police. All of that's torture. And based on his life's work, I think it is safe to assume that Charlie Kirk felt no such empathy for any of those groups of children that I just mentioned, or their families. In fact, here is Charlie Kirk, now famously saying that he can't stand the word empathy. Let's take a listen.
Actually, I think empathy is I can't stand the word empathy. Actually, I think empathy is a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage. But
empathy is a made-up New Age term. He can't stand the word empathy. So Kirk, as we know, repeatedly defended Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. He gleefully cheered on these ICE roundups and, of course, famously called George Floyd a scumbag in his 2021 visit to Minnesota. Right-wing celeb Charlie Kirk thinks George Floyd is a scumbag. And let's read a little bit of this article. Right-wing celebrity Charlie Kirk opened his appearance in Mankato Tuesday night by giving the crowd some advice. Just don't totally mess up this state. It was built by wonderful Scandinavians, and it seems as if it's being destroyed now, rather intentionally. Wonderful Scandinavians. In an 80-some minute speech, Kirk called George Floyd a scumbag, railed against the urban areas, especially Minneapolis, which is not the town it used to be, and seemingly referenced January 6th while lamenting how if you dare walk into the U.S. Capitol building and take a selfie, they'll put you in solitary confinement. I'll, of course, remind everyone George Floyd also had a 6-year-old daughter at the time that he was killed. Charlie Kirk and the rest of the MAGA influencers in his space spent the last week clearly attempting to stoke racial tensions after the horrible killing in Charlotte, North Carolina. Their solutions are the standard conservative playbook solutions: more jails, harsher sentences, a bigger and tougher and more draconian police state. They cite per capita statistics to try and convince people that black people are more dangerous than white people, never paying any thought to the possibility that this dynamic could be the result of the dismantling of the black family at the hands of that very police state. In this context, thinking about the 90s crime bill passed and advocated by Democrats. Not saying this is all a partisan thing, obviously, but these Gen Z people now, these millennial black criminals now, as they like to repeat at the top of their lungs, these are the children of the crime bill. I went to school in a majority minority district. It was a magnet program. So the schools were quoted to be a third black, a third brown, and a third white because the district was very big. It encompassed both the largely black and brown inner city of Newburgh and then the mostly white suburbs where I lived. And so when I went to school, we were all minorities. There was no majority race in any of the schools I went to as a kid. And I noticed that half the black kids I went to school with used the word grandma the way I use the word mom. They would talk about their grandma when they went home. Oh, my grandma's going to kill me when I get home. Oh, my grandma's not letting me out of the house today. And it was always struck me as kind of strange that they would refer to their grandmas all the time. But growing up and learning about the world and learning about the politics of that time, it's pretty obvious why they mentioned their grandmas over and over again. And I came to learn this about a few kids in particular who I knew, that their dads were in jail. Their dads were in jail because Joe Biden and Bill Clinton locked their dads in jail, and their moms had to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. So when they got home from school, it was their grandma who was home to take care of them.
Yeah, just to interject, they want to blame the Great Society.
Right, of course. Yeah. Not the erection of the police apparatus itself. And so maybe this generation of black men carry the trauma that kind of instability brings. I knew when I was a kid, I had friends whose parents were teachers who would hear stories from kids in the inner city about abusive boyfriend after abusive boyfriend coming into the house because the father wasn't there. The father was in prison. And, that creates tremendous trauma and creates a culture of violence, which afflicts this entire country. And so the way we do things in America, broadly speaking, traumatizes children and families. And what has always offended me the most about these MAGA influencers, and I've talked about this a lot on the show, Charlie Kirk, Jack Posobiec, Benny Johnson, etc., is that they rake in tremendous amounts of money promoting a family values brand while at the same time gleefully cheering on policies and programs that destroy children and families. I know Benny Johnson feels the pain of the Kirk children now. I know he does. He's a dad himself. He knew Charlie. And from one dad to another, I can say that I do respect that grief and that sadness and that fear, all of it. I would plea to him, likely in vain, but it's worth a try in a moment like this, to remember how you feel now in this moment for Charlie's kids. And remember that before you go out and hawk more merchandise from whatever the next theme park ice jail is, and think that the kids of the people in that jail are feeling just as lost, just as terrified, just as paralyzed by their parent having disappeared without explanation and for an indefinite period of time. And more broadly, I think it's a good starting point moving forward for us to agree to try and create a society that traumatizes as few children as possible. And yes, it is impossible to talk about that without talking about the problem of gun violence, of course. So here is Charlie Kirk, now in a famous video saying we have to accept a certain amount of gun violence for the sake of protecting the Second Amendment.
A cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational.
Yep. So, in fact, just yesterday, as this news was breaking, so was news of yet another school shooting in Colorado. The murder rate, if that murder rate of a city, if the murder rate of an American city is 10 out of every 100,000 people, that's considered bad. A murder rate of 10 out of 100,000. 20 is alarming. 30 is extreme. 40 out of 100,000 is out of control. As a percentage, how many American children do you think experience a school shooting in their lives? Well, the answer, 51 out of 100,000. Now, to be clear, that is not 51 deaths per 100,000, but that is 51 children out of every 100,000 live through a school shooting. My twin 6-year-olds just learned a mass shooter drill in school yesterday. They don't know what violence is, not really. They're blessed. They don't live in Gaza, so they don't know what violence is yet. But yesterday, they learned what to do if a maniac comes into the school and starts shooting. So 51 out of every 100,000 students in this country will experience a school shooting. That is the culture of violence that we have created. And as I mentioned, both parties have dirty hands in this, of course. But are these right-wing influencers particularly complicit in creating that culture of violence? Of course they are. Of course they are. And so just closing thoughts on the reactions to this horrific event before we get into some speculation about the event itself, because I do think, of course, there's a lot more than meets the eye going on here, and I have my suspicions, as I always do. But the last thoughts on this is that I do, of course, respect and sympathize with the grief that all of Charlie's friends and family are feeling now, and peers. And I beg of them to take a moment to see if they can find it somewhere in themselves to realize how the world they have advocated for has bred this culture of violence, and to take a step back from the brink. And I know what they're going to say. I know what the response, especially on the ICE shit. Well, they come here and commit crimes. Yeah, 80% of people agree that illegal immigrants who come here and commit violent crimes against Americans need to be detained and deported in order to protect other individuals and families from falling victim to violent crime. Black bagging day laborers at Home Depot parking lots does not accomplish that. All that accomplishes is further traumatizing children and families and breeding a culture of violence. And same goes for their attitudes towards Palestine. Same goes to their attitudes towards policing, towards black men in general, quite frankly, who they like to fearmonger about as much as they possibly can. Same goes for all of these culture war causes du jour. So, if you want this to stop, I would say we all need to try and do better. But that really does need to start with the magosphere, because I have never seen a group of prominent media people take such joy in the suffering of others as I have seen the likes of Benny, Jack, Gunther, and yes, Charlie. And so my heart does legitimately and honestly weep for his children. And I hope that Charlie's friends now can find it in themselves to shed a tear for other people's children, including all these groups I mentioned, who they have taken in a lot of money inflicting pain upon. And if they can do that, maybe they'll come out a little better on the other side, and maybe all of us will. So that's what I have to say about that.
Very well said. Were you going to show anything of the account responses?
No, I don't have any of that. No.
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 Okay.
I figured that would go on long enough.
Yes. All right. Well, nicely done, my friend. So going back, I didn't want to break your flow. So first of all, this thing, and we talked about covering it before this happened with Charlie Kirk. The way they really used this tragic stabbing in North Carolina to cross one of the last lines left and just openly argue black men are violent without any euphemism, without slipping it into something else, without hanging it on a particular person like George Floyd. They just came out with it. Benny in the closet did a whole monologue trying to argue that. Now, and I also mentioned, they want to blame the Great Society, and they don't want to talk about mass incarceration. Both of those things came into being around the same time, because with mass incarceration is really born with the war on drugs, right around the same time as the welfare state. They're born together. Now, I have my own criticisms of the welfare state. I think there are valid criticisms of it as creating a culture of dependency. We just interviewed Chairman Yeshitela for 9 hours. He has very much that critique, but his answer to that is not a libertarian hellscape where every person is for themselves. It's a culture of self-sufficiency where people cooperate together to make a better world for their group instead of as isolated individuals. Now, when you can't critique the economic system, when you can't ideologically, it's your brand, it's your bread and butter not to critique it, you can only talk about culture. You can only talk about that. Now, I can tell you, as somebody who grew up poor and white, a lot of the dysfunctions that they're attributing to Black culture, these are the dysfunctions of poverty.
Right.
The same things that you will see in a poor Black neighborhood, where if you grow up in a neighborhood like that, a lot of people you came up with will have been to prison. You'll probably have taken some arrests yourself. In my case, I went to jail a lot, never had the misfortune to act, and wasn't like a serious enough criminal to wind up in prison. But yeah, I got arrested a lot. You get treated differently when you're from a certain class. And this is something that poor white people have to understand too. That on steroids is what happens to Black people. You know how you're going to get treated different by the cops if you look like you're slummy than if you were dressed in a Brooks Brothers suit. Yeah, okay, so take that 10 times past that, and that's what it is to be poor and Black. It's not that
Right.
being poor and white. I lived it. Yeah, man. There is class discrimination that you will experience. A lot of people I came up with, it's self-deleted. These are not things that are common if you grow up in a prosperous suburb. These things really boil down to class. For people who are not white, you have racism thrown on top of that. But you can, anybody who's driven around this country, which all of these influencers have, you go through those Jerry Springer kind of areas, man. They had a whole show, the Jerry Springer show, that showed white people with the dysfunctions of poverty for sport to make fun of them, really.
Right.
But yeah, man, that is what happens when people are poor, when people are desperate, they fall subject to violence. They take out on each other. That was my experience. They take out on each other the anger they actually have towards the people above them that they don't have an outlet to express. So they wind up getting violent at a bar with each other, taking it out on each other. Substance abuse. So many more people that I grew up with died of cancer than people I went to college with. Like
Right.
it's much more common because not only the drinking and the prevalence of cigarettes, but a lot of them wind up working in construction where you're breathing all kinds of shit and dangerous chemicals, man. These are the disposable people in society. This is something that these people, by definition, cannot address. It's not their lane. What's really grotesque, and I don't just say this about them, this is the whole influencer space, commentator space of all ideologies. Most of these people are in it to make as much money as possible. And the crazier the take, the more extreme the take, the better it is for your bottom line. Those takes draw eyeballs. And the more divisive, the more us versus them. You see it on the other side. You see it on the other side. Yeah, you know, with the libs, they love to own the MAGA, right? They love cultural provocations that are going to get them angry, right? They love that. And on the other side, they love that too. If you're involved in creating a culture like that, on it, whatever your ideology, sooner or later the chickens are going to come home to roost. If you're constantly keeping a pot on a hot stove right at a simmer, it's going to boil over, man. You can't keep telling people the other person in your country is an existential threat to you and not have some people take that to a horrible place. And you got to remember, most of these people are about as authentic as a WWE wrestler. They're playing a fucking role. I saw Alex Jones tweet out, this is why this happened to Charlie Kirk, and it was him talking about family values. Do you really? I mean, I know you'll get into that on the other side, but does
Yes.
Alex Jones believe that? Do we believe that Alex Jones really believes that? He's playing a fucking character. There's a saying in acting, you have to be smart to play stupid. In other words, if you're really stupid, you're not going to get where the joke is, right? So
Right.
Marilyn Monroe had to be smart to play a dumb blonde
Right.
as effectively as she did. You look at someone like Gunther Eagleman, who immediately tweeted out, they declared war. You got to be smart to be that stupid, to play that stupid, to present as that stupid, because he understands who his audience is and he understands what they want to hear from him in that moment. And he does not at all care about people who are not him, who are going to read that framing, accept that framing, and maybe do something. He's not going to
Of
jail.
course. Of course.
He's not going to jail.
Right.
I mean, they're not going to shoot him, right? He's
Right.
not going to be the one to be the victim of that violence. So yeah, your plea for people to turn down the temperature, maybe do some reflecting, is well taken and appropriate. They're not going to do it because it's what Upton Sinclair said in The Jungle. Paraphrasing a bit, but in essence, a man has a tremendous capacity not to see a thing when his living depends upon his not seeing it. What are these guys going to do? Go get a real job? They're not. Most of them are not smart or talented enough to become real journalists, to write
Right.
real books, to
Of
do
course.
real research. This is it. All they got is hot takes and provocations, which Charlie Kirk, and I am with you. I don't support this action in any way. It is not, even if you are somebody who believes that revolutions rely on a certain amount of non-pacifistic activity, we'll call it. Even if you believe that, this kind of, even the communists don't believe in this kind of thing. Like just random violence like this, nothing is going to be accomplished that way. They have guns too.
It'll create civil war and fascism. That is what it ushers in.
That is all you're going to get. There's no message. There's no organization. There's no political project. This is emphatically, this is not the way. And all people who sit in front of a mic or sit in front of X, of all political persuasions, should think about what they put out into the world, because quite a few do pick the lane of the other is inhuman as the default because it's what their audience wants to hear. It's the best thing for their bottom line.
Yes. And it's not a game, as we learned very harshly yesterday. And so, yes, I think that is well said. And to your point about the culture, this exhibit I did save for the very end. There was a vigil for Charlie Kirk that was disrupted by, somebody says the leftist, somebody says it's BLM, who rolls through and screams Charlie Kirk
This guy's
sucks.
gonna get fucked. Some guy.
And then obviously a brawl breaks out. This is only going one way, the wrong way. And
Yeah.
I put this here as sort of a segue and a teaser into the next segment. It'll be clipped separately. But assuming this was a professional hit, which I absolutely believe it was, whoever did it was looking for this kind of reaction, was looking for vigils disrupted by protesters, disrupted by more violence and chaos, and they're winning. They're winning. This is what they want. And it feels pretty hopeless, but we got to do what we can to make it not as hopeless as it looks.